My name is Brian Sackett. I'm a board member for Spiritual Awakenings International, and it's my honor and pleasure to be introducing our next speaker today. He is William Peters, who's a marriage and family therapist, and he's a world-leading authority on the shared death experience. He's the founder of the Shared Crossing Project and director of its research initiative. He served at the Zen Hospice Project in San Francisco and has had his own two near-death experiences. His most recent work has been published in the American Academy of Hospice and Palliative Medicine, and also Omega, Journal of Death and Dying. And he's the author of the best-selling book, At Heaven's Door, What Shared Journeys to the Afterlife Teach About Dying Well and Living Better, which is published by Simon & Schuster. Please join me in welcoming William.
Thank you, Brian, for the introduction. And I want to start really by really thanking Yvonne for really, this has just grown. I can't tell you how many people have emailed me and said, hey, I hear you're going to be on this great conference, Spiritual Awakening International. And so that's really wonderful. And I'm honored that Yvonne has asked me. I couldn't be here last year, but I'm glad to be here this year. And so I'm going to dive right in, and you'll see the talk today, Shared Death Experience, Accompanying Loved Ones Across the Veil and Into a Glorious Afterlife. As we get started here, I want to let everyone know that two Shared Crossing staff people are fielding questions in the chat. So if you get something from Nancy or Linda Dawn, they're from the Shared Crossing Project. So you can fire your questions away and they'll be happy to support you and provide you as much information as they can. All right, so here's what I want to do today. I want to just talk briefly about the Shared Crossing Project and its research initiative. Just so you know where all these videos, all these people you're going to see today sharing their shared death experiences, how they come to us, where they come from, and what we do with their accounts. I'm going to review the literature on the shared death experience. Many of you probably aren't that familiar with it, so I'm going to give a formal definition, and then I'm going to give a bit of a lit review. And then I'm going to talk about our study just briefly to tell you what we've learned about the SDE up to date. And by the way, SDE means shared death experience. And then I'm going to introduce two typologies, and then I'm going to talk about the therapeutic benefits of the SDE. Okay, so first, the Shared Crossing Project. The mission of the Shared Crossing Project is to positively transform relationships to death and dying through education and raising awareness about shared crossings and their healing benefits. Our belief, and it's not so much our belief, it's what we learned, is when you reimagine what death is, when you have a different understanding of what death is, it really transforms the way you live. And we'll see that as we study the shared death experience. First of all, the big project we have here is our research initiative. And this is a multidisciplinary team. We have medical doctors, we have psychotherapists, we have academicians, we have 6 researchers. They're volunteers, they're interns, they're from all over the world. They help us process many of the SDEs we get now from literally all over the world. And we study a phenomena that we call shared crossings. I'll define that in a bit. It's end-of-life experiences or transformative spiritual experiences that occur in and around end of life. We collect, we analyze these documents or these accounts, and then we focus on the therapeutic benefits. You have to realize that I am a psychotherapist. I do this work because I have seen the healing benefits that embracing spiritual end-of-life experiences yields for us. And then I advocate for more knowledge about shared crossings. So I want to begin by introducing the spectrum of end-of-life experiences. We call this SELE. This is something I created about 10 years ago now. And this is because people were coming to me for grief and bereavement therapy and after a loss of a loved one. And these are the types of experiences they would share with me. I'm just going to do this briefly. You can learn more about this on our website at sharedcrossing.com. But it really begins with pre-death premonitions. Then there's pre-death visions and visitations. There are synchronicities throughout end of life. And these are so profound when people say, I can't believe the synchronicities that are occurring around the death of a loved one or afterwards. Then there's terminal lucidity. This is this kind of sudden awakening that somebody who can be unresponsive for days, if not months, just before they die, they wake up and they're talking coherently to their loved ones around the bedside. The shared death experience, I think, is the queen, the jewel experience of all end-of-life experiences, and I'll go into that a little bit more later. The direct post-death communication is communication that tends to happen right after the death of a loved one, and the surviving loved ones will say, it's like my departed loved one is in my mind, reading my thoughts, hearing my thoughts, and responding to me, and giving me specific information or instruction that they want me to hear. And then we have synchronicities, of course, those happen throughout. And then post-death visions and visitations. These are when people appear, often at the foot of a bed, they look healthy and normal, and they say to their bereaved and loved one, you see I'm alive and well. I love you, and I'll see you at a later date. Okay, that's the spectrum. And I just want you to know, this was published in Omega, Journal of Death and Dying. And it was, we see this as a tool for advancing death education. It's been adopted by many who work in end of life. All right, so we're going to focus now on the shared death experience. And this is an experience in which a loved one, caregiver, or bystander expresses that they somehow shared in the dying person's transition into a benevolent afterlife. And this is what we hear. It's like, I feel like I was with my loved one and I accompanied them across the veil and I saw this beautiful afterlife. It was incredible. So this is the definition. But the 4 characteristics of the SDE, broadly speaking, are that there's always this motif of journey. There's a movement, typically up, ascending, and typically towards the light. And the themes that are expressed are love, ineffable love. People don't have the words to describe the beautiful feelings they have. And a sense of belonging. They'll use terms like, I felt so at home. I've never felt so connected. And then this sense of knowledge. They have divine cosmic knowledge. They'll say things like, I understood everything. From that point of view, everything made sense to me. Even the tragic death of my loved one, it all made sense. And there's a divine order to everything. And then relationships appear central. And when I say that, I mean the relationship between the experiencer and the person who dies, that seems to be the conduit that facilitates the shared death experience. In other words, the bond between the dying and their loved ones is strong, and it seems to facilitate the connection across the veil. Now, it's important to note that the NDE and the SDE are similar, if not identical, in terms of possible phenomena. And this makes sense because we're looking at the same landscape. And by the way, I made an assumption. NDE is near-death experience. So those near-death experiencers and shared-death experiencers are looking at the same landscape. And we're going to go into that right now. So here are the features that are found in both shared-death experiences and near-death experiences. Just take a look at this. Encounters with spirit beings, transcendent light, life reviews, unusual energies, alterations in time and space, heavenly realms, sensed presences, tunnels and gateways, borders and boundaries, profound peace, ineffabilities, and feelings of connectivity and unity. So here's the primary difference, just so if you're wondering, well, what is the difference between a near-death experience and a shared-death experience? Well, a near-death experience occurs with people who are actually experiencing a brush with death. A shared-death experience is occurred by a caregiver, loved one, or bystanders who are actually not dying. They're simply caring for someone who's dying. They can be at bedside or remote, not at bedside, but they're healthy in mind and body. And this is really important because so many so-called scientific experts have discounted the near-death experience because they say it's a fear-death response. It's a neurological process happening in a dying brain. Well, the SDE dispels that. So one real key feature that is just highlighted in both is they both describe the act of dying as moving toward the light. So I'm going to do a brief lit review, and I want to be clear. This is a brief lit review. This isn't exhaustive. But people ask, like, well, why are we just discovering the shared death experience now in the modern age? It's a great question. I wonder that myself. But when you do a lit review, as we have done, you realize that the shared death experience has been recognized in different aspects of the academic community, if you will, since the late 1800s. And the first sightings of this would be in the late 1880s with the Society for Psychical Research. And Frederick Myers, he was one of the founders of SPR, as we call it, Society for Psychical Research. And in his tome, this is a 700-page volume, and actually there's 2 volumes here. And he and his team described these SDEs as apparitions at death. And I'm going to show you a chart that's going to be so illustrative. So this is from 1904. Now look at this. This is 1 week before moment of death. You see moment of death being the vertical axis in the middle that looks like a sail or a mast with a sail connected. And then you see 1 year after. But at the moment of death is when they see the highest quantity of apparitions of death. So, and that, my friends, is where the SDE occurs. So in 1926, Sir William Barrett, also part of the Society for Psychical Research, he wrote Deathbed Visions. This was actually published posthumously. And what is amazing about this book is that there are 56 accounts or stories and of deathbed visions, but 17 of them are shared death experiences. That means caregivers, loved ones at the bedside of someone dying, typically reporting some apparition they saw. And of course, that would be a visitation of relatives, deceased relatives, could be, they vary, could be elevated or, spirit beings coming down. They could see the dying person transitioning, but they're documented here in 1926. What happens after 1926 is there's kind of a split in the academic community, and the focus becomes on the experience of the dying. And you'll see Carlos Osis and Erlander Haraldson did a large study in the 60s and 70s, studying with questionnaires of healthcare providers. They sent questionnaires of healthcare providers in India and the United States, and to ask them, what do you observe in the dying? And 50% of these came back and said that they saw pre-death visions. That means the dying was reported to talking to spirits or deceased relatives on the other side of the veil, essentially. And these are now well studied. Christopher Kerr, many of you may know, has really done extensive research, and he calls these end-of-life experiences. But these are not shared death experiences. They are focused on, the research was focused on the dying. But I think it's just a key research piece, just so you know. But Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who all of us should know, started publishing, in the late 1960s, and then published for the next 3 decades. And she was keenly interested in near-death experiences and other end-of-life experiences. And if you listen, I have heard some of her recordings, and she does make reference to shared death experiences in her recordings, but she doesn't, in her public speaking, I should say, but I never saw her publish on it. But she was aware of the shared death experience. Maggie Callanan, most of you should know her because her book, Final Gifts, was a bestseller when it came out, and is really a bedrock of hospice care providers. She talked about nearing death awareness, and this is more like, what do you see in the dying as they approach end of life? She is well aware of shared death experiences. In fact, she's a big advocate of our work, but she doesn't mention those in her book, Final Gifts, and she also had another book that came after this. But like I said, shared death experiences are still not making it in the literature formally until Yvonne Cason. Really, the first person. I know, Yvonne, you were kind of surprised when we talked, when you saw this in our preparation here. But in 2000 and also in 2019, she makes reference to death watch experiences. These are shared death experiences. When you are at the bedside of someone dying and all of a sudden you have a spiritually transformative experience. In other words, you seem to be transported into another realm, or you somehow feel like you're experiencing something that the dying are experiencing. So that's the first time it's actually mentioned. And then soon after that, PMH Atwater, yes, well known in the near-death experience community, she talks about empathic death experiences. And these are basically shared death experiences. But it isn't until early 2000s when Dr. Peter Fenwick breaks with the trend of focusing on the experiences of the dying, and now he turns his attention and that of his research team to the experience of caregivers. And he publishes with his team in 2009 a wonderful article that talks about when he interviews carers in UK are caregivers. But his key findings are end-of-life experiences. These are what we would call shared crossings, are not uncommon. And they provide support for caregivers, and caregivers want more training on these end-of-life experiences. That's what Ellie's are. And he's really advocating for more study and more training. He wrote a wonderful book with his wife, Elizabeth. She is a nurse. And he refers to this in his book. He makes reference to deathbed coincidences. These are what we would call remote shared death experiences. So he says, he identifies that someone's dying in London, but they have a relative in, say, Spain, and the Spanish relative says, at the moment of death, I was woken up and I had a vision of seeing my departed loved one, and my departing loved one said to me, "I'm fine, I love you." And so this would be what he calls a deathbed coincidence. It's what we call a remote SDE. The term shared death experience does not get used. I should say it's not published. Raymond Moody has been using the term shared death experience since about the 90s. But Raymond and I talk about, how he came to this term. And he says, I was really wrestling with all sorts of terms. Empathic death experience was one, shared death experience being the other. And he just decided to use shared death experience. So the term, it was getting bantied about, but it wasn't until his book, Glimpses of Eternity, in 2010, that it was actually published in written literature. And he's got like 50 accounts in this book, and they're really just stories, just letters that he received, because so many people were writing him letters saying, I didn't have a near-death experience, but I had something at the time of death of my mother or father or loved one, and it was amazingly similar to the near-death experience. Well, that makes sense, because we now know that these experiences, the shared death experience and the near-death experience, are looking at the same, if you will, landscape, afterlife landscape, after the time of death or a brush with death. So Raymond is the first one to publish, but then it picks up some steam in terms of getting attention. Larry Dossey wrote in One Mind, 2013, he cited SDE cases, he cited Raymond's research, and then he cited Joan Borisenko. Many of you may know her. She's an oncological researcher and a best-selling author. And she talked about her SDE when her mother died. And that was a multi-person SDE, because both Joan's son and her had this experience. Okay, but the first real research in terms of getting into the medical literature happens in 2021 when our initiative, the Shared Crossing Research Initiative, published in the I should just say this, the American Journal of Hospice and Palliative Medicine is one of the top journals in hospice and palliative care. And so when we were published here, this was in December, this was quite an acknowledgement that the SDE is real, it occurs with frequency, and needs to be honored in the practice of end-of-life care. So our study was 107 shared death experience, 107 shared death experiencers who reported 165 SDEs. Well, that obviously means that some experiencers have more than one, and we find that 41% of SDE experiencers will indeed have more than one SDE. So the key findings in this, just to break it down here, is that the previous SDE research, primarily by Raymond Moody, only accounted for bedside shared death experiences. Well, we found that 64% of our SDEs were reported remotely. And this is what Peter Fennick was highlighting when he talked about these deathbed coincidences, because all of his experiences were indeed remote SDEs. Once again, he referred them as deathbed coincidences. So another really important correlate with the SDE is that over 2/3 of the SDE experiencers will report some sort of mindfulness practice or meditative practice, and that can be anything from prayer to yoga to Tai Chi. We even include those people who say, well, I have a practice of walking in nature every day. A lot of people do that. And that would be a practice of working, connecting with nature and being mindful about, your body and nature and that type of thing. So we include that as well. So you can see that these practices, from what we can tell, tend to be facilitators of this. Now, the first general public book, if you will, that is research-based on the SDE came out in my book, and just 2 years ago. And this has 28 shared death experience accounts, and they're pretty well developed. Most of them, if you read this, are, some of them are 12 pages, 10 to 12 pages. But we really go into the features of the SDE, which I'll be outlining today. So here we go. Let's get into the typologies of SDEs. There are I'll be presenting two typologies. The first one is what we call the general typology. Two main types of SDEs: bedside. That means you're present with the dying. You're in their room, likely at the bedside or sitting near them. But there's also remote SDEs, and I've alluded to these already. And these can take place if you're just down the hall from your loved one dying, if you're across town, or if you're on the other side of the globe. These are just different types of remote SDEs. There's also a subset of the remote SDE called a flyby. And this is a beautiful experience where you're just doing your life, like maybe shopping and looking over clothes. This is actually a common account. Just you're kind of focused on another activity. Maybe it's driving, maybe it's shopping, or maybe you're just walking in nature, and all of a sudden you have this presence that someone's visiting you. And you stop, they get your attention, and you may have a vision of them, or a vision may be the sense you see them, they say, thank you, I love you, and a sense of goodbye. And then you have this sense of, oh my God, my Mary just died. And you'd have a knowing that this person just died. But it can also be a sense of you have a dream, and then you have this sense, you don't know what it is, but you wake up and you say, wow, I was just awakened by somebody, I don't know what it is. And then you find out a few hours later that a friend of yours has died. So there's knowing who's visiting you in a flyby and not knowing. There are two subtypes of shared death experience. The first is time variation. 75% of our SDEs happen right at the moment of death, but about 25% happen a little bit before or a little bit after. And those can be a few hours before or after, and in some rare cases, even up to a day or so. And there's also a gradual SDE. That means you kind of go in and out of an SDE for a long period of time. Now, the individual, Brian Sackett, who is moderating my talk today, he has a wonderful gradual SDE when his ex-wife died. And it took place over a matter of weeks, if not months. He had this ability to go in and out of the SDE state. So he was doing his life, even working, but he would just tap back into that state. That takes an incredible amount of awareness to be able to do that. That's a rare trait. We've seen it a number of times, but in the over 1,000 cases that I've reviewed, only less than a dozen people have reported that capacity. There's also multi-person SDE. That means more than one person have the SDE, and they could all be around the bedside, or some person can be at the bedside and others remotely located. Okay, the second and more developed and more in-depth type of a typology we use for SDEs are what we call the 4 participatory modes. And that means we call these MOPs, modes of participation. This means, in simple language, what is the experience of the experiencer? And that means what is the mode of experience? And we call this the mode of participation in the SDE experience. And there are 4. The first is remotely sensing a death. The second is witnessing unusual phenomena. This is death-related phenomena. This is really SDE and NDE phenomena that I've already outlined. And then accompanying the dying. This happens about 12% of the time. This means you actually go with the dying. And half of those accompanying the dying cases, the experiencer will say, no, I actually assisted the dying in the transition. I actually helped guide them. So we're going to go into these in depth now. So remotely sensing, this happens in about 25% of these cases. And by the way, these are not mutually exclusive. So you can have remotely sensing, and you can also have mode of participation number 2, which is witnessing death-related phenomena. But this one, remotely sensing, is brief thoughts, feelings, or sense presence around the time of death. By the way, this could be a flyby. And there's also sudden onset of sympathetic physical feelings. This only happens in 8% of our cases. This is the experiencer takes on or empathically connects with physical symptoms that are similar to what the dying are actually experiencing. And what's interesting about these is this tends only to happen in remotes. It's like very rarely do you have a bedside SDE where someone's taking on the physical symptoms of the dying. It happens, but it's more common remotely, which suggests that maybe someone's trying to get our attention. All right, we're going to do a case here with Dawn. Dawn is going to share a tragic case where she's actually preparing for Sean's wedding. She's doing flowers. When Sean is out with some friends a few days before what would be his wedding, and listen to her experience. And by the way, Sean will be sharing this, and then her husband will be at her side. So just so you see, that's what you'll see in the video.
So I have 3 children. Sean was 28 at the time. Sean was 5 days away from getting married. They went out to a little place where they advertised ping pong, and the whole group, there were 6 of them, and the whole group was playing ping pong. He broke a ping pong paddle, and they walked across the street to the Walmart to purchase a new ping pong paddle, but it was a grocery store. It wasn't a regular Walmart. It was a grocery Walmart. So they went to CVS, they purchased some snacks and some beer. They were all crossing back across the road, and a car hit 2 of them. Well, at the time, we were standing right here where we are, and we were hot gluing flowers on this big selfie board for the wedding because we also own a handyman business. So we were helping them to get a lot of stuff done. And I was texting his girlfriend saying, do you like this? Do you know what this is? And she said, is that tissue paper? And I was writing her back saying yes. And I lost vision of the phone. And my feet came off the floor. I felt like I was going to pass out. And I got real nauseated. And I scooted this bench up under me. And I looked behind me because we had all these flowers on the kitchen floor through the hallway. And I looked back, and real strong, all of a sudden, I felt Sean is dead. And in my mind, I said, we're wasting our time. And I went to take my glasses off my head, and the phone came back into vision. And I went to tell Toby, but things happened so quick. I received a call at 22:31. And I said, this happened at 22:27. And so a week later, we're in the DMV, and we're taking Sean's vehicles and transferring them back into our names as well as my son. And the time of injury says 22:28. And I said, see, I told you guys this happened at 22:27, because I continue to tell my family, my friends, everybody, something happened to me. Something happened. I can't explain it. I'm an ER nurse. I don't know medicine like this at all. And I've told my husband when we backed out of the drive, he said he remembers me telling him that I had a premonition, and at the time I thought that that's what it was. I didn't know enough about all of this to think anything different. And my very good friend, all of our friends show up. Everybody shows up, from Catholics to Baptists to nobody. And my good friend, who's a Catholic, I said to her, this is what happened to me. I felt it. I felt what happened. I felt the accident. I could tell you exactly the moment. I've said since day one, I will stand on my rooftop as a normal, average American who makes average money, who has an average life, who has 3 decent children, that doesn't take any medicine, that this is what happened to me. I feel like I felt my son as he passed from this earth.
So this is a really tragic case, but just notice the conviction that Dawn has when she says, I felt my son pass through this earth. She had that, what we call sympathetic shared death experience. She felt it. Now we're going to go on to, this is the second mode of participation. Witnessing unusual phenomena. Here you see the phenomena that we see reported in our research: visions of the dying, transcendent light, sensing energy, alterations in time and space, encounters with non-human entities, seeing spirit leave the body, encounters with deceased loved ones, appearance of heavenly realms. And there are others. Probably one of the most common ones, which we didn't list here, is sublime feelings, or just strong energetic feelings. So this one is going to focus on, Sally's going to focus on seeing spirit leave the body. This is going to be with her mother, and just notice the way Sally describes what she sees.
Very shortly after that, I saw this membranous type thing come away from the whole periphery of her body. And it was defined. It was definitely an edge. And as it came apart, coming up from the body to fill this thing was like this gray stuff. And I say stuff because, I've been thinking about this since I talked to you guys, and I just cannot put my hand on anything specific to tell you what it was like. I mean, Yeah, foggy. No, it had a little more particulate stuff to it. It was something in this form at this time solid enough that it was still in a three-dimensional thing for me to see. So it moved, though. It congealed, and it slowly came together around her. And this membrane, and I think this had to be three-dimensional, but I could only see 2 dimensions in this thing. So this membrane opened like this and started going up towards the corner as a little bit, like a feather edge started going up, of the grayish stuff started going up with the tunnel. I called it a tunnel. I don't know if it was three-dimensional, but anyhow. And as it started to go up, the rest started to follow, more solid. Now I'm picturing the room. I'd say about halfway up to that corner, it started going a little faster from the body, and the corner, and a little less fast up to the corner where it started to disappear, this tube and the edges of the tube anyhow. And it just kept going up, and soon it was all out of her body and almost all disappeared at the top until the very last bit just went up fast.
So Sally shares, really, I just love how humble she is. But we hear this, an experiencer will see the spirit leave the body. It's described in different ways. You'll hear a couple other descriptions of spirit leaving body in a moment as well. One in particular, when we get to another person, Angela, she'll come up in a moment. But she's very convinced this is her mother, and she actually has a conversation with her mother a bit there too, if you notice. And that's just, these feelings of love and what have you are part of the experience. This is Cynthia Vitale, and this is an experience she had with her husband. She's bedside. This is mode of participation number 3. This means she is going to accompany her husband. And then you're going to see the way she relates to him as he's ascending. There's a lot of great features. And then the feature that we really appreciate is this handoff that that Cynthia does with her husband to Cynthia's mother-in-law.
He got diagnosed with Alzheimer's in 2014. He had enough cognitive ability all the way to then to not want to go to facility. So he chose to stop eating and drinking. I made myself available to whatever I could do to make his life a little more meaningful for him. So then he decided, we picked a date for him to stop eating and drinking. That lasted for about 2 weeks and a day. So I remember lifting up out of my form, my body, and then taking my husband, his name was Shar, by the hand and pulling him up. And then I pulled him up past me, and then he pulled me up past him. And we kept doing that for a long time. I don't really know. So a lot of stuff was probably going on that I don't know about. And the sensation was very freeing. He was fully intact. He wasn't mentally compromised then. There was no sensation of constraint or discomfort from anybody's body. And then I saw the light. I almost feel corny saying that, but I saw the light. And it's not like a pinpoint light. It's it's huge light. And I told him that, look, there is the light, and we both turned towards it and went towards it. And then his mother appeared, and in the experience of the light, there was a complete wholeness sensation for me. A lot of freedom was in that. A lot, any of my own psychology wasn't there. none of that was there. It was just that opportunity to experience that. And then his mother reached to him, and then he reached to her, and he was still holding my hand, and he looked back at me and said, but I want to stay with you. And then he slipped away. And I think that was it. I don't remember too much after that. I think it was profound how it affected my grief. When we lose, most of us, definitely me, take loss personal. And like something, we don't think something's wrong here, but somehow or other, at least that's what I do, I take responsibility of something being wrong here. And I didn't hardly do any of that. I didn't want him gone. I didn't want to have to recuperate from it. I didn't want to have to do all this that I had done, but it made it a lot easier. It made it, I don't even want to use the word tolerable, because it was really more than that. It gave me a place to be open and still be with people, I guess.
So Cynthia has really two parts in this. She describes her experience, and then she describes what we call the transformational value, the positive after effects. But first, let's look at her experience. It's really a spectacular SDE. She's with her husband, so you see the most common feature we have, encountering the departing loved one. So she has that. And as she describes, they're ascending. Ascension's another feature. They're going back, kind of somersaulting together, going up. And then they see Cynthia's mother-in-law, her husband's father, and that's seeing a deceased relative and a spirit being, of course. And then she basically, hands off her husband to her mother-in-law. And there's a boundary. She says, there's a point in which I can't go any further. And she kind of acknowledges that a bit. And also she sees the light. And she says there was a sense of wholeness, complete wholeness in the light, a knowing, as we see, hear this repeated so often, felt everything was complete. That sense of wholeness. And like we say, you can see me running out of words here because they're so hard to describe. But then she talks about grief and how her grief was somehow different than what we expect. And it's not like she didn't miss her partner, but what it really is that the SDE contextualizes the loss. You realize your loved one is alive and well. And so the death, albeit painful, is not seen as a cold, stark end to everything. It's like the death is a loss, but it's imbued with meaning because your loved one's alive and well somewhere. Okay, we'll go into that a little bit more later, but now we're going to go to mode of participation. Oh, by the way, that was mode of participation number 3, accompanying the dying. And that's what Cindy, demonstrated. An out-of-body or visionary realm will, of course, progresses on a journey. We saw that. Ascension towards the light, yes. Other heavenly realms acquire special knowledge. Yes, there's special knowledges. There was a complete sense of wholeness. He says that. I had a complete sense of wholeness. That's that special knowledge. Everything's okay. And then the appearance of the boundary, she realized that her husband was going on, but she was not. Okay, now we're going into assisting the dying. This is number 4, mode of participation number 4. And similar to accompaniment, but the participants additionally report that they have this sense of being required to help the transitioning. This is going to be Mark, and he's going to have this experience with his father, and his father is going to be dying in Canada, and Mark actually is in New Jersey. So let's listen to this.
We knew he had pancreatic cancer. And by this point, my dad's in the hospital. and and so we're I've been out in the woods for 2 weeks, and I was driving back up to the farm that I lived at with my friend Brian Gooding, and I was super tired. I hadn't slept much in 2 weeks, and so I just put the seat back in the chair, and as soon as I did that, it's like, I could feel my father. I was like, I need to check in on him, and so I send my spirit to the hospital where I knew he was, and I get there, and he was just a wraith, of a man. And I remember going to him at his bedside and speaking to him and saying, Dad, it's like, why don't you just let go? Mom's going to be all right. All us kids are going to be all right. You can go. Like, there's nothing holding you here anymore. And he looks at me, and, there's no surprise in his face that I was actually there talking to him. But the puzzlement was in his face was he said, I don't know how. He says, I don't know how. And I knew right away, as soon as I was there with my dad, that that's exactly what I needed to do. And I picked him up. And he was as light as a feather, like there's almost nothing to him. And I started that meditation, walking down this particular trail. And at a certain point, you turn and step up these stairs and walking towards the light. And after I climbed these stairs, his ethereal body was becoming stronger and stronger to the point where, like, I was able to set him down and he walked with me. And so we're walking side by side. And I took him to the light. And as we got close, my father and my grandmother had a really, really close and beautiful and amazing, magical relationship. And she passed away in 1978. As we got close to the light, there was like a doorway where the numinosity of the light coming out of there was just was unbelievable. And my grandmother steps out of that light, and she's standing there. The look of joy on his face when he saw my grandmother was just like a look I hadn't seen in his face in years and years and years. And he just went and hugged her. And my uncle came out of the light at that point. I had one uncle that had passed at that point, and he joined the fray, and the three of them were just again, the joy was just unbelievable. And, none of them touched me. They were very, 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 very clearly that I wasn't part of that group. But, that my job was done. Like, I brought my dad there, and now, like, they had it. It was really how it felt. And they didn't speak to me either. And then my dad, he just turns and looks at me, and it's just this huge smile on his face. And he just said, I didn't know that it was this easy. And then the three of them turned and walked into the light. And the next thing I come to, and I'm in the seat of my friend Brian's truck, and we're just pulling into the farmyard. And and I was exhausted, and also very, like, feeling incredibly emotional from this experience I just had with my father. And I said, I got to go to bed, And so I went to bed, and then I woke the next morning, and the phone rang, and it was for me. And I answered the phone. I said, it was my brother. And he said, Dad passed away. And I said, yeah, I know.
So that is, just another beautiful experience. But keep in mind, this is a remote SDE. So Mark's having this experience, 3,000 or 4,000 miles away from his father. And it has so many features. First, he encounters his father in the spirit realm. Then he's ascending with his father. Notice the movement upwards towards the light. He's carrying his father in a certain way. Then there's the welcoming party. That's Mark's grandmother and uncle are there to greet his father. And then there is this handoff. Once again, similar to Cynthia's, Mark hands his father to his grandmother. He watches the embrace. The feelings are indescribable. Once again, feelings of love and belonging and ineffability. And then Mark hits this boundary. He realizes he's not going where his father's going, and it ends. And then there's just kind of this goodbye. And there's one other feature. We're going to get to it right now. It's called the conductor. In this situation, it seems like Mark's grandmother may be kind of facilitating his father's transition. And we're going to talk about this feature now. This is a unique feature in the SDE. It is the conductor. It's my favorite feature in the SDE. And it's as if this being appears that's orchestrating, managing the transition of souls from the human realm into the next dimension called the afterlife. And the conductor appears in a variety of forms. It can appear as an angel. It can appear as a previously deceased loved one. As in this case, seems like Mark's grandmother is playing this role of conductor. But sometimes it's an unknown figure, and we'll see this in a case in a moment where you just don't know who these figures are. And sometimes it's seen as Mark saw it, and we'll have a couple others in a moment. But sometimes it's just sensed. It's just like you feel like there's someone guiding this whole transition process. But the personality of the conductor is compelling. And we see this over and over again. The conductor has intentionality. It's purposeful. It works with an urgency. It's like it has a job to do, and it does it fiercely, and even directing people in the earth realm, surviving loved ones, to like stay away, or I've got this. So we're going to see Angela start out here. And this is going to be an experience she had with her mother-in-law. And notice the two angels that appear, primarily the main angel.
I didn't particularly have a close relationship with her, unfortunately. I wished it had been, it was close at the end. Jean, my mother-in-law, she wasn't with it. She was completely unconscious, and she wasn't even being fed. She was on heavy medication now. As I went into the kitchen and I just glanced over, I noticed that the room was a welcoming gold colour. And it looked as though you wanted to be in there. As I got to the room, it felt like the whole room was in some kind of a bubble and not to enter it. I felt as though I shouldn't go into that room. So, but as I noticed, Jean had something not out of her head, but in like the centre of her body here, was about a foot away from her body. And it was translucent and it was moving out of her body, but you could see through it. I couldn't believe it. And in the corner of the room, the very corner to the left, in the corner, there was a massive angel with huge wings. It was like a bird, white wings. I say it's an angel. I don't know. It didn't even have a head, to be honest with you. But it was a white being. It was white. It wasn't translucent. And its wings were moving with the tips of them, moving inwards like that. Beckoning motion, a strong beckoning. I thought I couldn't believe it. And she was like moving. She wasn't shape. She was just translucent, irregular ball. Not even a ball. It was irregular shape. It wasn't a shape of a person or anything. And it was moving up to this white being that was doing this movement. But there was another smaller one, the other side, doing the same movement. Exactly. And there was a very, very, very high-pitched tone, and it felt as though this was all included with the bubble that was in this whole room. Well, I said to Dorothy, and I knew that something told me that I shouldn't really be telling Dorothy, so though I was going to be disturbing something that was going on in the room, but I couldn't not tell her that her mother has just died. So I said to her, Dole, your mum has just died. And she said to me, no, Ange, I've just been in to see her, she's fine. So I said, so with that, as I said that, this white being seemed to turn to me in quite a, I don't know how to put this, it was telepathically, but it turned to me, it didn't even have a head, but it turned to me and it said to me, wait. And this other little one, the other side, seemed to turn to it in a panicking kind of way, as if to say, what are we going to do now? And was doing it as well. They were going a bit faster and a bit of an urgency going on. So I said to Dorothy, she's definitely died. And with that, Dorothy come barging past me into the room. And as she got into the room, she said she came over all dizzy as she pushed into the room. And with that, my father-in-law sat up and said, what? And she disappeared into the corner.
So this is really a spectacular SDE. Once again, this is a bedside SDE. And it's really witnessing unusual phenomena, mode of participation, number 2. But the conductor is the main feature here, and that is the angel. And there seems to be a little angel that's, I want to say, appears to be an apprentice, kind of training. I mean, it could be too simplistic. But what's powerful about this is the personality of the conductor is common to what we see. Forceful, in control. I love this, weight. And we hear this, that the conductor is directing, managing the transition of souls and spirits from the human realm into the afterlife. Also, notice the spirit leaving the body. Very similar description to what we heard from Sally earlier. Okay, we're going to go on and see. In the interest of time, I'm going to just do a brief introduction. We're not going to see this whole video because I need to stop in a few moments. And I have a few other slides to say. So, but here's one from Rod. And Rod's at the bedside of his mother, but he's going to talk about a mysterious man. So this is an example of a conductor who's present, has a role, but Rod doesn't recognize this being at all. And the being really doesn't want to interact with Rod, but Rod's fixated on this being because he senses it has some sort of elevated status, if you will. So we're just going to listen to part of this.
The walls and the ceiling of the room kind of just went away. And I felt like I was sitting in some kind of an arena. I mean, a huge arena with people literally 360 degrees around me. More people than I could ever identify. But one by one, they would kind of make themselves present. There was this man who kind of was, going back to that arena visual, he was kind of like up and, up in the cheap seat ticket area, and I'm like, but somehow his presence pulled my attention amongst everyone around him. I don't know why. But I kept looking at him because I'm going, no, I don't know you. How do you fit into all this? Of course, at the time, I didn't even realize to think about the fact that all of this multitude of people is like, I didn't know most of them, but at least the ones who were coming through were people I knew. And I remember looking at him, and he was kind of like, no, just don't, pay no attention to this guy. And I kept going, well, who are you? And why are you here? And why am I noticing you? Because I don't recognize you at all. And he just said, it doesn't matter. I'm here for your mom. Not to worry, no problem. And he was very unforthcoming. He did not want to talk. And that struck me as really fascinating and interesting, that there would be someone there, and ultimately a lot of other people there that I didn't know, that had no connection to that life term of my mom's, yet he was there for her in this moment.
So we're not going to finish this, but Rod goes on to say that he has a sense that this mysterious man, as he calls him, is there for his mother and is somehow supporting her in this transition. And that fits the definition of the conductor. Okay. I'm just going to, by way of closing here, this is from our research. People who have the shared death experience report the following. They believe their deceased loved ones are alive and well. They're convinced of an afterlife. It's kind of the number one thing we see. Oh, I know I and everyone I love is going to go on into another existence. Their grief, as Cynthia Vitale pointed out, is it's not that you don't have grief, it's that the grief is held in a larger context of understanding and meaning. It imbues the loss with meaning and understanding that death is a natural part of a human life. It's the end of a human life, but that we go on. And also this reduction in fear is also a key feature. And finally, there's a renewed life purpose that most people come back with. Okay, and then a couple other things here. Here's the study conclusions. Remote SDEs are more common than bedside, as the common after effects I just reviewed. Certainty of an afterlife, belief that the deceased are alive and well. 41% of experiencers have more than one. 25% of experiencers have an ongoing relationship with the deceased loved one. We call this a continuing bond. And then 78% will have another type of end-of-life experience or shared crossing experience, usually a post-death visitation of some type. So if you have more questions about us, or if you had, and more importantly, if you've had an SDE, please contact us. We want to hear from you, especially we take them from everywhere, but we're really interested in hearing people from outside of the North America. That doesn't mean if you haven't had one, if you've had one in North America, please call us, but we're really trying to get these experiences from around the world. And also, we have a support group, the Shared Death Experience, our SDE sharing group. We have one in England, one in the UK or Europe, and also the United States. You can go to our website, sharedcrossing.com /SDE-sharing group. These are great groups where people get together and talk about their SDEs. If you haven't had an SDE or just curious, you're more than welcome to join. You'll find these experiences, these sessions are really informative. And then we have, okay, a lot of people say, how can we facilitate an SDE for myself and my loved ones? We have a group called The Pathways, and it's not scheduled. I think we'll do one in the fall, but just go to our website. You can get on our email list at sharedcrossing.com. Just register there, and we'll send you information. We don't send a lot of emails out, so don't worry about that. And finally, if you want to learn more about the SDE, we have 2 courses that we offer. They're online. They're one I taught with Raymond Moody, and the other I do a deeper dig by myself. It's called Transformational Journeys. Go to our website. If you order this if you go to our website and you're interested, we have a conference discount. These usually go for $99. We're offering them to this community for $79. Just sharecrossing.com and go to our courses there.
Thank you so much. That was fascinating and really added to our understanding of what happens after life. So really appreciate it. So we have a number of questions. Let's get into those because we only have about 10 minutes left now to answer the question. So as I was putting groceries away, I felt the presence of a dear friend near me. I felt this friend telling me he had just passed. I said aloud, "You are not dead, no way." A few days later, I found my friend had passed away. What would this be considered as?
That's a beautiful case account. I'm sorry for the loss of your friend. That obviously is sudden and a surprise. That's not what we want, but death does happen, as we know. That would be what we call a remote shared death experience. It is the most common SDE. It happens about 66% of the time. In this particular situation, I want to hear more. If you would be so kind as to go to our sharecrossing.com and go to our contact page and submit your case, we'd want to interview about it. But this sounds like it would be a flyby in the sense that his departing loved one came to him, said to him, announced, "I've died, and but that I'm okay." And I imagine there's some other types of communication in there as well, like I am okay, don't worry about me, and maybe I love you, because those are the common communication features. But yeah, that's well known, and it's a beautiful experience if you can take it as your departing loved one wanted to say goodbye to you, wanted to let you know that he or she had died.
Great, thank you, William. Deborah asked, do you have any experience with a passing that is related to self-harm / suicide?
Yes, we do. We do have suicides. Not a lot, actually, but we do have them. And when we have them, there's typically a sense of remorse expressed on the part of the person transitioning, and a sense that this wasn't about you. I'm really sorry. I got overwhelmed. So there's usually a healthy communication that doesn't make the surviving loved one feel like they could have done something more about it. We also do have in that same genre drug overdoses, which cause death, and some of those are sympathetic, where a mother or a relative or a good friend, a partner will feel either like sweating, vomiting, real painful convulsions in the body, and they find out later that their loved one has had a drug overdose.
Great, thank you, William. Catherine asks, why aren't shared death experiences and near-death experiences more common, especially for those who are open to them?
Oh, boy, that is the holy grail question right there. That's a great question. We don't know why, but I'll tell you this, is that, when we work with people, because that's a big part of the Shared Crossing project, is to prepare people for what we call a conscious, connected, and loving end-of-life experience. We do provide protocols that we think enable the SDE. We do guided visualizations and preparation where we teach loved ones how to go into the afterlife together. And if there is a disconnection across the veil as you're crossing the veil, which is more common than not, we teach them how to reconnect. So most of the people we work with, not most, but I'd say a quarter to upwards of 30-40% will have a shared death experience, but about 80%, 80 to 90% will have some sort of profound shared crossing. It's often a post-death visitation, which is really meaningful to the surviving loved one.
Great. I think this may be our last question, depending on how long it is. It's kind of a long one. This is from Brittany. I've just had a remote SDE since I was a child. I recently had my own NDE roughly 2 weeks ago. It's almost like being woken up on the other side of the veil. I truly don't know how to explain it. It's like for the last 17 years, I was slowly dying, and then part of me did die, but that somehow allowed me to be spiritually complete. I've been having soul sessions towards alignment for over a year now, but I seem to have some kind of issue with focus now that I didn't have before my NDE. Is there any specific way you know of to work towards mindfulness and reestablishing connectivity with myself? It's almost like I'm on airplane mode about 85% of the time.
That is a really fascinating question, a really beautiful question. I talked to Raymond Moody about this. From my own experience, I had 2 near-death experiences, and I asked him one time, this is early in our relationship, I said, I feel like not all of myself came back from my second SDE. And he laughed. He kind of, he's very playful. And he said, he goes, yeah, he says, some people will say that they left part of themselves over there. He says, but that's more rare than it is. I see Yvonne laughing. Yvonne is also a near-death experience veteran, shall we say. And actually, Yvonne, you might want to comment on this. I do think when we have these profound spiritual experiences, it's really important when we come back to get grounded here and know that we're living here. And there are practices for that. And there are diets for that as well. There's certain foods you can eat. There's certain practices. And there's like walking in nature is really important. Grounding exercises. All those help us get more into our bodies, more embodiment. And with that, we can have more mindfulness over our human earthly experience. But I'm sorry for those of us who've had these experiences where we feel like we're halfway between heaven and earth at times. And sometimes it's blissful and wonderful, but sometimes we just want to be here. And we might not have what we might want to say full control over that. So yeah, great question. And I actually think it's on the cutting edge of what so many of us experiencers struggle with in a certain way, is full embodiment once we've had these spiritually transformative experiences. How do you come back, integrate the experience, but live fully here?
Thank you, William. There is time for one more. What about turning lights on and off? Hold on a second. What about turning lights on and off, connection to electricity? My cousin shared this recently when my aunt passed.
Yes, this is what we call a post-death. Well, this is a synchronicity, and they happen. They happen before death, at the time of death, around death, and after death. These are synchronicities. Electrical synchronicities are really common. Lights going on and off. Digital clocks displaying important dates, anniversaries, birth dates, what have you. Also, what you see electrically is music. Like you'll be driving in your car, and I used to say, I am not studying this stuff. This is too far out. But then I can't tell you, like, and we've had dozens of cases where people will report after the death of a loved one, I'm driving on the car, I'm grieving, and all of a sudden the favorite song of my loved one comes on, and I'm like, oh my God, well, right now I'm going to listen to that. And then his or her second favorite song. And then the person says, oh my God, I'm just going to lose it if this song comes on, his third or fourth favorite song, and it comes right on. And it's just like, you can't make this stuff up. So there's something, we call these synchronicities. I mean, they're just like normal people just say, I can't believe this happened. I don't want to believe this is possible or true. Or I guess I do, but I don't want to be weird and too far out there. And yet we have the data that says these experiences happen.
Great. I think that will wrap it up. Thank you so much, William. It's really wonderful work. As you know, I had my own experience with this, and just hearing more about other people's really is helpful. So thanks for all your good work and a great presentation.
Well, thank you for having me. Really an honor. And thank you both. Thank you all for this excellent, really noble service to bring all these experiences to the world. Bye-bye.